Hello everyone, I'm going to be going over how to work with CSS today. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and this is just the visual language that we use to create a web page. So this is really all the fun stuff. So the fonts that you have on the page, the background colors, the text colors, the shadows, the animations, the smooth transitions from things that are opening and closing. CSS can control a lot. And it also can allow us to adjust our layout a little bit, put things on the right or the left or above and below. We can really do a lot with CSS. Now, CSS can be done in three different ways. We can write it in the head element of our web page. So if we go back over to the How HTML Works page, just a reminder, we have this head element where it has information that the browser needs to know. And so you can have a style element that you use and write your CSS directly in there. Now, that's not what we're going to do in our case. We can write our CSS directly in line like we've been doing with our image sizes. So this right here is adding some CSS specifically to control the size of our images. And the third way, which is the way that we're going to be doing, is linking to an external style sheet that we can change our web pages with. And so we do this inside of the head element of your web page. So you have things like the title, you might have additional metadata, which we'll talk about later, and then we have this link to the style sheet. The link includes three pieces of information. We have the rel attribute, and this is just letting the browser know, hey, this is a style sheet. And so inside of quotes, you want to say style sheet. We're going to specify the type, and this is text/CSS, and it's always going to be exactly the same. The only thing that changes in this link is our href, or our hyperreference, where the style sheet is located and what's it called. In this case, it's just called style.css, and that's pretty standard. You'll see style or styles.css. Sometimes you'll see stylesheet.css. You might see other names, and honestly, the name doesn't matter so much as long as you know what it is. But that's the only part that might change over here. And so this just says that there is a file called style.css at the same level of the website as the current page. So sometimes it might be inside another folder. In this case, it's just in the website folder that contains the current page. Now, as far as the CSS goes, when you save your style sheet, so your page called style.css or whatever it's called, we have what are called selectors, and that controls what part of the HTML is going to actually be changed by the CSS. So we have some sort of selector, so that's what's going to be changing. Inside of curling brackets, we have what are called properties and then values. So you have the property, colon, and then some sort of value, semicolon. Now you might have multiple properties and values inside of the same style or the same set of brackets. You might have multiple values that are part of a single property. And you can actually have multiple selectors and you just put a comma in between each one. So what this actually looks like in action is you have your selector, and one thing we can use as a selector is just the name of the element, so section, paragraph, whatever you have in your HTML. Then you have the curling brackets, and to change the background color, you literally just write background-color and whatever color it is you're changing. For text color, it's just the word color, colon, whatever color it is you're changing, semicolon. And that's inside those curling brackets. So if we head over to the Try It Yourself editor, you'll notice this looks a little bit different. I have some HTML that's already in place, and we have some CSS. Now, a CSS comment is a little bit different from the HTML, so you'll notice there's some information here, and it's just asking you to customize the text colors, the background colors, and also the fonts, which we'll talk about later on. There are actually a couple of empty styles that I have set up for you. The first one is using what's called an ID. You can identify an ID on the CSS side with the hashtag. So CSS_intro is the name of the ID. If we look in the HTML, we can see the main element has this ID called CSS_intro. So the name is written exactly the same, you just have a hashtag in front of it. We also have what's called a class, and so period class underscore example, and that is a class that's been applied to the section. So the ID is something that's used a single time on the page to just identify something that is used once. A class is used when it's something that you might be reusing, just an identifier that you can use multiple times. So I have these empty brackets here, and now I can start making changes. So maybe for my main element, which has this ID, I can add a background dash color. I'm going to add a colon. And you may have noticed in the example over here, I'm just saying some names of colors. And there are certain colors that I can do that for. Like I know that I think lime green is a color that's automatically recognized by the browser. So really simple colors like lime, violet, things that are pretty standard are going to work. I know there's a color called cadet blue, and so that displays, and that's a color that's used on the website. And just so you're aware, not every color name will work. There are specific color names that do. But a lot of really standard basic color names are names that will work. But there are a lot of other colors, formats that we can use. So I can use an hex color. So if I have a hashtag and then just F, 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 all the way up to 6 Fs, and that is just the color white. If I have 6 Cs, this is going to be sort of a light gray. There we go. That's just going to be a light gray. So when you're in a program like Procreate or in Affinity Photo, there's actually a spot with the color picker where you can actually see what the hex numbers are, or if you're just searching online for specific colors, they'll often give you the hex number as an option. We can also use RGB, so red, green, and blue, and then inside of parentheses up to 3 numbers. So if I do 0, 0, 0, that's going to be the color black. I think it's either 250 or 255. If I have all those same numbers, it's going to be white. I can add an A here to add an alpha channel, and then if I can have a 4th number that's maybe a decimal like 0.5, and so that's going to be translucent, and 0 is completely transparent, 1 is completely opaque. I can experiment with what makes sense as far as that goes. So lots of formats we can use, and whatever makes sense, try something out for the background. We're also going to be changing the text color, and again, that's just the word color. And when I'm testing something out, I often go with red just because it's super obvious if it's working. Probably not the color combination I'm going to stick with. I might come back to this later. Now, these are already set up for you, but you can also add your own. Now, maybe I want my paragraphs to be different for some reason. Maybe they're going to have a specific color. Maybe they're going to just have their own background color. So again, you can use the element name. So I could use main, H1, section, P for paragraph, any elements that display in the body, or even just body itself. I can select that. So I'm just using P as a selector because that's one of the elements that's there. Maybe this is going to have a different background color. And I'm going to go with the cadet blue this time. Always do a semicolon after the value. And watch out for spelling. There we go. And you can see that that color is just where the paragraph is located. So I'm probably going to switch that out. I probably don't want that combination there, but you can see how that's working. All right. Now we also have, just for some really simple CSS, we have the fonts that we can change. So font family controls the specific font that's displaying. I want to remind you when you press F4 and search for font, we have this really handy app called FontBook where you can see just all of the fonts that are on the computer, and you have a couple different views and how you're looking at them. and you can just really quickly arrow through the different styles to see the font that you want. Now, let's say I want to use Baskerville as the font in my CSS. I'm going to get rid of my background color here because I don't particularly like having a background color just on a paragraph when it looks like this. But I'm going to add font-family and Baskerville. So it can be as simple as that, and you can see the font changes. Now, it is important to write the name of the font exactly how it is typed in the name. If you have a font that has a space in the name, if there's a space in the name, then you need to have quotes. And I'm just double checking my spelling there. I think I inverted a couple letters. You can see that font changed a little bit. Now, we often have a list of fonts when we're working with the font family. The first font is the one that's going to display. The next font is just a fallback in case there's a problem. The font's not available on the computer, so this one displays instead. And we end the list with what's considered a generic font family. As far as the generic families go, we have Fantasy, Serif, Sans Serif, Monospace, and they'll all look a little bit different. I'm just going to temporarily cut these so we can see. This is what Fantasy looks like on a Mac. I think it uses Comic Sans when you're looking at Windows. Monospace is going to give you really a sort of classic old school computer looking sort of font. Serif is going to give you a font that has serifs at the end, probably something like Times New Roman. Sans serif is going to give you something without the serifs, so something like Arial. And so those are just all fallbacks in case the font that you want isn't available. Now, there are a lot of other things we can change with the fonts. We can change the font size, we can change the font weight, we can add a font variant, we can add italics, so all sorts of things that we can change for the font here. So font weight is the property. I'm going to add a colon. I can do something like bold or bolder, and you can see that gets bold. And depends on the font if bolder is going to work. I can do the font weight with numbers ranging from 100 to something like 800. So font size, and again, watch out for your spelling. So you'll often see the font size in pixels. Sometimes you'll see the font size in M's. Now, an M is like 16 pixels, I believe. And so you can do some interesting things with M's when you're making things work across multiple screen sizes. Those are probably the two most common units that you'll see for the font size. So there are others that will probably work. So font variant, font style. So small caps is interesting because the first letter of a sentence will be larger, but everything will still be capitalized. I'm going to remove that because I probably would not do that to paragraphs. It might be something that would be more appropriate for a title. So maybe for the H1. All right. We also have font style when we want to make something italic. There we go. So there are certainly other things we can do with fonts and with colors, but this should be enough to get you started with the CSS. So again, just go through, add some text colors, add some background colors, add a couple different font families, and make sure you use your own selector at least once. And that is it for now.